How can we be more self-aware, especially when it requires knowing what we don't know about ourselves? Well, today I'm going to share a little bit about the unconscious and how depth psychology theory has influenced my own practices and helped me with this journey towards developing more insight. So, first, I just wanted to start by saying that when we talk about self-awareness, the way that I'm thinking of it is what's within consciousness. Um, and that means also what is outside of my awareness, what is in the unconscious. Now, the unconscious, as Carl Jung imagined it, has both a personal and a collective component. So, this means that when I'm looking at what I'm aware of or what I'm not aware of, I'm also dealing with what the human community is aware of versus unaware of. And you can think about this. The metaphor that I have heard taught was that it's like we're a wave in the ocean. We're both a single wave, but we're also connected to all the other waves. So a little paradox there. But this means that what the global community is experiencing, what they're repressing or disowning, all of that can have an impact on me as an individual. So a doorway in to exploring self-awareness and to working with the unconscious can be to look at, what is happening on a global level. What are we noticing in terms of what is getting disowned? And when I say disowned, I mean like kind of pushed aside or pushed down. What are the movements that I'm seeing in terms of values, in terms of narratives? What's really interesting right now is I hear like there's this productivity push on the one hand, but also there's a lot of people that are now talking about rest and the value of rest. There's a push to work from home or, get paid parental leave. But there's also a push to make people go back to work, and, so forth, right? So there's like an action and like an equal and opposite reaction in a lot of cases. But this can be good information for us to start looking at what are the values, what are the value shifts that I'm noticing, and do I feel like I'm being, pushed along with the current, or do I feel like I'm swimming against it? Where do I fit into all of this? And so that's kind of one thing that I like to consider, because we can't really think of self-awareness without also thinking about awareness of the world around us, right? And how we fit in to the global community. And then another thing that I like to consider is Carl Jung talked about the unconscious as being like a lake that cannot be drained. And to me, this means that the unconscious has a limitless quality. We can never really be 100% self-aware. So I like that because it invites me to have a humble approach to the unconscious. I will never always, or I will never know everything, right? And I can always assume that there is something that is just outside of awareness. And the more that I listen to the unconscious or try to work with it, then the more likely I am to recognize those things when they do pop up. Because the way that, one way that we can work with the unconscious is to recognize that it often things will bubble up into our conscious awareness, right? I think most people have had an experience at some point in their life of one of those aha moments, right? Where you discover some truth about yourself and it just comes out of nowhere. Well, one way of thinking about that is that it's coming out of the unconscious into your awareness. That's another way of looking at insight. So for me, there's some ways that we can invite the unconscious to kind of make it self-known, or I guess listen to it because it's always speaking to us, in my perspective. So in depth psychology, there's these methods, including working with dreams is one of them. So for me, this looks like if I have a dream and I want to work on it, I'll make a point of writing it down as soon as I wake up and paying attention as well to the content and the emotion that I'm experiencing in that moment when I wake up or whatever emotions I had in the dream. and just writing it down. And then there's some really cool ways of working with dream material. Like some people will draw out dreams or they'll act them out. There's, people will look at the symbolism, what things represent. It's really interesting. This is something that people can do in therapy with someone who studied depth psychology as well. And there are also people who will dialogue with dream figures. So if there's an image in a dream or a figure in a dream, they'll have like a conversation with that person or that image. There's lots of ways to kind of be creative and see what meaning comes from it. Another big step here is you'll notice that this is very like playful. I'm not using a lot of judgment, like labeling what things are. And that's part of the depth psychology spirit is having this curious approach with the unconscious, like asking questions, listening for answers. And another way too to recognize things that are coming up from the unconscious are to pay attention to the patterns that are happening in our life because we tend to repeat certain patterns and to pay attention like to conflict. What triggers us? What is in common with what triggers us? What is it about it that is kind of getting us all stirred up and activated? There's usually something that's kind of driving that degree of a response. Obviously, like this might be something that is best done with a therapist because it can be a little unsettling to discover truths about ourselves or to dig into triggers. Another thing that people can do is just pretty much any kind of art creation and just seeing what comes up from them. And then one more way of getting into the unconscious is just to pay attention to symptoms because symptoms can be seen as like a knock on a door. They're present for a reason, and it's an invitation, or it can be seen as an invitation to slow down and listen to see what needs to be shifted. In depth psychology, there's a movement towards integration and towards flexibility, towards openness. And a lot of us in, our society, it's like there's a lot of demands and people can get very rigid or very stuck. And so a lot of times the unconscious will move someone out of that, right? Or there'll be like an invitation to. And this can look like, you're working so hard that then you get sick, right? And you physically cannot go to work. You can see that as being an invitation to rest, right? Like the body takes over and forces the rest if we don't listen to it by caring for it sooner. So these are just a few little things about the unconscious that have been helpful for me in my own journey. And then I also wanted to just close by saying that with consciousness and unconsciousness, like this is complex material and there's so many different approaches with it. But for me, the big takeaway here is that I like to take kind of like a loving, non-judgmental, accepting, curious stance when it comes to awareness of myself and others. And remember that there's like the individual and the collective component. So sometimes it's really hard to know what's individual and what's collective. And that's okay. But I think the stance of asking that question can be very powerful because it invites us to take different perspectives and really be open to other ideas that might come up. And if you liked this video, please feel free to like it or share it, subscribe. If there's anything here that didn't work for you, please leave it. Thank you for listening.